The moment my sister called me a glorified janitor, the crystal champagne flute in her hand was refracting the light from a chandelier I'd salvaged myself. She was sitting on a throne of my making and had no idea. Worse than Serafina's insult was the profound, chilling normalcy of it, as if my erasure was simply another course on the evening's prix-fixe menu. No one at the table flinched, not my mother, whose posture remained impeccably straight, nor my father, lost in the blue glow of his phone. My brother Ronan just stared into his plate. It was a guest, a man whose name I'd already forgotten, who finally looked around the opulent dining room and asked, his voice laced with genuine curiosity, "What's the owner doing eating with the guests?" And in that deafening silence, the world I had so carefully constructed cracked wide open. The message had arrived 2 days earlier, just after 3 in the afternoon, a digital dart piercing the sanctum of my workshop. My phone buzzed on a workbench scarred with saw marks and paint stains, vibrating against a blueprint for a rooftop apiary. It was from my mother, Genevieve. A text from her was a rare enough event to make my pulse jump. It was brutally efficient. Engagement dinner for Serafina and Julian. Vespera on Thursday, 7 p.m. No greeting, no sign-off, and certainly no acknowledgement that Vespera, the city's most coveted reservation, was mine. They didn't know. How could they? I had built my company, Terra Nova Restoration, from the grit and rubble of Chicago's forgotten spaces, a world away from their polished galas and strategic mergers. They had once dismissed my first major contract, revitalizing a series of derelict community buildings, as charity work, something to keep their odd daughter busy. The irony that they had chosen my flagship restaurant, a testament to that very work, because its aesthetic was suitably chic for Serafina's engagement, was a weight that settled deep in my bones. I wiped the soil from my hands with a clean rag and stared at the screen, letting the breathtaking absurdity of it wash over me. A part of me, the part that had spent a lifetime trying to grow armor, screamed not to go, to protect the fragile peace I had built in my solitude. But another voice, quieter and far more stubborn, the ghost of the girl they'd always tried to edit out of the family portrait, whispered, "Show up. Let them sit in the space you built. Let them breathe the air you purified." So, I replied with 2 words that felt like both a surrender and a declaration of war. "I'll be there." On Thursday evening, I arrived 10 minutes early. The late autumn wind bit at my cheeks as I stepped out of the ride share, a stark contrast to the warm, honeyed light spilling from Vespera's entrance. I wore a simple charcoal gray slip dress, a tailored piece that felt grounded and strong, my hair pulled back in a severe knot. It was a look Genevieve would have called understated, with a faint note of pity, but it made me feel like myself. The burnished copper sign for Vespera gleamed under the streetlights, its elegant script a secret I held close. I took a deep, steadying breath and for the first time in months walked in through the front door. Javier, my floor manager, was conferring with a host near the entrance. His eyes, usually a mask of professional calm, widened a fraction when he saw me. He was accustomed to me entering through the kitchen, a wraith appearing for late-night inventory checks or emergency repairs, not as a guest arriving for dinner service. He gave me a discreet, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement between sovereigns. While I waited, I pulled up Instagram. Serafina had posted a story an hour before, a boomerang of her manicured hand flashing her new diamond ring, overlaid with the caption, "Hope the Queen of Compost remembered to wear perfume tonight." My name wasn't tagged, but the target was unmistakable. She'd always preferred her cruelty served with a dazzling smile. A young server, one I hadn't hired myself, approached me with an anxious look. "Ma'am, could you possibly help with a spill over by table 9? He asked, mistaking my simple dress for a uniform. Before I could form a reply, Javier materialized beside him, his presence instantly calming the turbulent air. "This guest is with the Sterling party," he said, his voice smooth and precise. The young man flushed crimson, stammering an apology before scurrying away. I let the moment pass. Tonight was not about correcting minor misperceptions. It was about observing the grand, catastrophic one unfolding at the center of my dining room. The family was already seated at the best table, of course, directly beneath the massive chandelier I had spent a month restoring from a decommissioned theater. Genevieve, draped in pale cashmere, wore an expression of pained tolerance. My father, Alistair, was scrolling through stock market alerts. Serafina, luminous in winter white, had her arm woven through Julian's. He was the human equivalent of a perfect LinkedIn profile, bespoke suit, confident smile, and an unnerving vacancy in his eyes. I approached the table. Genevieve offered an air kiss that smelled faintly of expensive lilies and disappointment. "Lyra," she said, her tone the one she used for valets and waitstaff. "You made it." "I'm on time," I replied softly, my gaze flickering to the antique clock on the far wall, a piece I had sourced from a closing railway station. Serafina offered her cheek without rising from her seat. "You look comfortable," she murmured, her eyes scanning my dress with forensic disdain. Julian gave me a firm, hollow nod. "A pleasure to meet you," he said. Despite our brief encounter at a city planning gala 2 years prior, I hadn't introduced myself then. He hadn't remembered me now. Champagne was poured. The conversation immediately swirled around wedding logistics, guest lists, and honeymoon destinations in the Maldives. I was an island, silent and unacknowledged, as the tide of their chatter flowed around me. When I tried to mention a new grant my company had secured to build urban gardens in food deserts, Genevieve simply blinked. "How pleasant," she said, before turning back to debate the merits of peonies versus roses for the bridal bouquet. Dinner service began, a silent ballet I had choreographed myself. The staff moved with a fluid efficiency that was the result of hundreds of hours of training. I saw everything. The precise temperature of the plates, the artful swirl of the sauce, the way the custom lighting caught the facets of the wine glasses without creating glare. Every single element in that room was a decision I had made, a battle I had won, none of it registered. During the first course, a delicate parsnip soup, Genevieve turned to me. "That dress," she said, tilting her head, "it's very functional. Much like your work, I imagine." I managed a tight smile. "It serves its purpose." Alistair cleared his throat, lifting his glass. "To Julian," he declared, his voice resonating with patriarchal pride, "to the man who will elevate this family's name, our vision, our future." A chorus of clinking crystal. Serafina beamed. Genevieve nodded, her approval a tangible force. No one looked at me. I raised my flute anyway, the tiny bubbles catching the light. Inside me, something cold and hard settled into place. They were toasting a man who didn't know where he was, in a room I had built from nothing, with cutlery I had chosen, dining from a menu I had bled for, and I wasn't even part of their vision for the future. The clinking of silverware on porcelain was the soundtrack to my slow execution. Alistair leaned toward Julian, speaking in the hushed conspiratorial tone he reserved for men he considered his equals. "This wedding will open doors, son. The Vanderbilts, the Pritzkers, they don't just show up for anyone. They'll be there for you now." Genevieve, the family's chief social strategist, chimed in, mapping out the seating chart like a general planning a campaign, listing names that were capital, not people. I was not on the map. Everyone else had been asked about their work, their recent travels, their children. The space around me was a vacuum. I might as well have been a ghost at the feast. When the main courses arrived, Genevieve fixed me with the same rehearsed smile she'd worn in every family photograph since my childhood. "Still doing that thing with the urban renewal projects?" What is it you call it? The words dripped with condescension, as if my life's work was a quaint, slightly embarrassing hobby. Still doing that thing, I confirmed, my voice even. Only now there's a 6-month waiting list for our services. She gave a small, dismissive laugh. Well, everyone needs a purpose, I suppose, even if it's a bit unorthodox. I saw Julian watching the exchange, his expression a carefully neutral mask. Perhaps he'd never witnessed someone being so politely disemboweled before. A few minutes later, a distant cousin named Mallory, emboldened by her second glass of wine, asked the simple question that was anything but. So, Lara, what is it exactly that you do? Before I could answer, Serafina waved a dismissive hand. Oh, she runs a sort of eco-collective. It's a very noble community project turning old lots into gardens. It's cute. Cute. The word hung in the air. A few nervous chuckles rippled around the table. Hey, at least you're doing your part for the planet, Alden added with a condescending smirk. My business, which had just been awarded a municipal contract to restore the entire historic waterfront district, which employed over 50 people, which had pioneered 3 new methods in sustainable architecture, was cute. My silence grew teeth. I excused myself, feigning a need for the restroom. My heels made a sharp, steady clicking on the polished concrete floors as I walked past the open kitchen. Through the pass-through window, I saw my team plating with intense focus, steam rising like incense, their movements a familiar ritual. My fingerprints were on every surface in that kitchen, yet no one in that dining room knew it. In the bathroom, I gripped the cool marble of the sink and stared at my reflection. My lipstick was faded. My shoulders were slumped. I straightened my spine, tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear, and met my own gaze in the mirror. CEO, I whispered to the woman staring back. Founder, owner. The words weren't a defense. They were facts. I stayed there until the weight of them anchored me again, not because I doubted them, but because I needed to remember I hadn't climbed this far to be crushed by their shallow perception. When I returned, the atmosphere at the table was unchanged. My smile was a mask, but the silence inside me had transformed. It was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of preparation. The dinner wore on, a tedious performance of wealth and status. Every topic orbited Serafina and Julian. Her dress fitting, his latest acquisition, the brand synergy of their union. He tossed around phrases like leveraging assets and strategic alliances, trying desperately to sound vital in a room that had already crowned him king. My fork moved listlessly across my plate, pushing a roasted heirloom carrot. How many dinners like this had I endured? Different venues, same script. Genevieve turned to me again, her smile a weapon. By the way, I used that tote bag you gave me for my birthday, she announced, as if granting me a momentary reprieve from exile. I looked up. It's very practical, she continued. I put all my gardening supplies in it. The trowel, the gloves, a few bottles of pesticide. It's a very sturdy utility bag. My throat tightened. That bag was custom-made, printed with the motto of Terra Nova Restoration, a motto I had written myself after 2 years of relentless work. We mend what is broken. It had been a gift of identity, a way of saying, this is who I am, this is what I do, and she had turned it into a caddy for poison. Serafina caught my expression, and a flicker of cruel amusement danced in her eyes. She didn't have to say a word. As she walked away, I straightened. A man across the table, one of Julian's groomsmen, looked at me. Lyra, right? What was it you do again? My mouth opened, but Serafina, ever vigilant, cut me off. She runs a non-profit that builds parks, she said smoothly, waving a dismissive hand. It's sweet, definitely not corporate, but very heartfelt. I let her lie hang in the air, Let them marinate in their own ignorance. She called it heartfelt, the business that had just landed a 7-figure deal to retrofit a downtown skyscraper to be fully energy independent. I reached for my phone, which I'd placed face down on the table. My thumb swiped the screen on. A notification from a trade journal hovered there. An article about my work was the cover story. Headline: The Architect of the Second City's Future. I excused myself again, claiming an urgent call. No one objected. Outside on the heated patio, the chilly Chicago air smelled of rosemary from the herb wall I'd designed. I walked to a stone bench beneath a small, struggling birch tree, a native species I was determined to cultivate even in this harsh climate. For a moment, I considered sending the link to the article to the family group chat. The old Lyra, the one who craved their validation, begged me to do it. But another voice, my voice, steady and clear, said something else. They can call me whatever they want. They can mislabel, minimize, and mock. But their words don't change the truth of what I have built. I locked the phone. They will know my name before this night is over, I whispered, not with rage, but with the cold certainty of a coming dawn. When I returned, the air at the table had shifted. The main courses had arrived, a pan-seared duck breast with a cherry reduction sauce, a dish that had taken my head chef and me 6 weeks to perfect. Serafina's nose wrinkled. I thought I said no fruit sauces, she said, her voice sharp enough to draw a glance from the neighboring table. Julian leaned toward her. Is it a problem, darling? The cherries are infused with smoked paprika and balsamic, I said, my voice calm and unwavering. It's a savory profile, not sweet, but if it's a concern, we can prepare something else. The server, a young woman named Clara, froze, her eyes darting to me for direction. I gave her a single, sharp nod. Serafina, flustered by the sudden attention, backtracked. No, it's fine, she said, pushing the duck breast around her plate. I'll manage. Just then, a man from another table stood and approached ours. He was in his late 50s, with the quiet confidence of old money. Excuse me, he said, addressing the table at large. I just have to say, this place is extraordinary. The ambiance, the acoustics, the thoughtfulness of the design. It's intentional, respectful. He turned, his gaze landing on me. This feels like it has a single guiding vision. Are you part of the creative team here? Before anyone could speak, I smiled. You could say that. As he walked away, Julian let out a low whistle. You get that a lot? Not from the people who should notice, I said softly. The conversation faltered after that. A particular silence fell, the kind that descends when tension becomes a physical presence at the table. Genevieve tried to rally, her laughter a little too bright. I've already spoken to the florist about the wedding, Serafina. You'll want someone discreet. Not everyone is successful in their first marriage. Her eyes flickered to me, a pointed reference to a short-lived union I'd had in my early 20s. I placed my water glass down with deliberate care. Sometimes surviving the wrong choice is the real success. A small, sharp intake of breath came from Mallory. Julian looked around, desperate for a change of subject. Genevieve's smile tightened. Well, she said, no one's perfect. Julian turned to Serafina, his charm feeling rehearsed. This place really is perfect for tonight, though. Classy, upscale, but still grounded. Exactly, Serafina beamed, regaining her footing. It's sophisticated, without feeling pretentious. They spent a year developing a proprietary composting system that turns all food waste into nutrient-rich soil for the city's parks, I offered, letting the fact drop like a stone into a still pond. Serafina nodded, oblivious. That's what happens when true professionals are in charge. Julian clinked his fork against his plate. Crazy how far you've come from hauling dirt around, huh, Lyra? There it was, the final erasure. My smile was serene as I set down my fork. "You're right, Serafina," I said, my voice low, but carrying to every corner of the table. "I don't just haul dirt anymore. I own the ground you're all sitting on." Genevieve's hand, reaching for her wine, froze mid-air. Julian's grin dissolved. Serafina's eyes widened for a split second before she masked it with icy composure. "People like to imagine success is a straight line," I continued, my voice even, calm, and lethal. "They think the titles and the press releases are what matter. But sometimes, the hands that got dirty are the ones that built the foundation. This restaurant, the reclaimed wood in these tables, the air filtration system that makes this room feel so fresh, the chef whose food you're praising, those weren't decisions made by a committee. They were mine." No one moved. The silence was absolute. "Maybe next time you wonder who signs the checks for a place like this," I added, my voice now a whisper that felt like a shout. "Remember that it might be the person you've spent your whole life looking past." Just then, the doors to the main dining room opened, and Cassandra Dubois walked in. Cassandra was a legend, a Pulitzer-winning architectural critic whose reviews could make or break a billion-dollar development. She wore a severe black coat, her silver hair cut in a sharp bob, and she exuded an authority that required no introduction. She strode directly to our table, stopping at my side. "Lyra, darling," she said, her voice a low, melodious hum that cut through the tension. She placed a hand on my shoulder. "I was dining in the private room and heard you were here. I had to come and say hello." She scanned the stunned faces at the table. "And if this is your family, they must be bursting with pride. Vespera is a masterpiece." "It's more than a restaurant. It's a statement about what this city can and should be." No one said a word. The investors at the neighboring table were watching with undisguised curiosity. Alistair, my father, who had been silent for most of the evening, finally looked up from his phone, a deep frown creasing his brow. He stared at Cassandra, then at me. "I'd like to meet the owner," he said, his voice strained, "to give them our compliments." Serafina, seeing an opportunity to reclaim the narrative, perked up. "Yes, we should thank them personally." Cassandra smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. "You've been thanking her all night," she said, her gaze fixed on me. "You just didn't know it." It was then that the guest from earlier, the one who'd asked about the owner, spoke up again, his voice carrying across the now silent room. "Excuse me," he called to Javier, who was standing stoically by the host stand. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but what's the owner doing dining with guests tonight?" Every head at my table swiveled toward Javier. He didn't miss a beat. "Ms. Sterling requested to dine discreetly this evening," he replied calmly, his eyes meeting mine with a look of profound, unwavering loyalty. The pieces, finally, irrevocably, clicked into place. Alistair's face went slack with disbelief. Julian looked as if he'd been physically struck. And Serafina. Serafina stared at me, her cheeks flushed with a toxic mix of humiliation and fury. "You've been hiding this?" she whispered, her voice cracking. I didn't blink. "No," I said, the truth of it settling over me like a warm cloak. "You've just been refusing to see it." I rose from my chair, not with drama, but with a sense of finality. Cassandra was already at my side, a silent, formidable ally. I gathered my small clutch from the table. I looked at my family one last time, not for an apology, not for approval. Just for a flicker of recognition. Even then, none came. "This time," I said quietly, to the table, to the room, to the ghosts of my past, "I'll send the check." 2 days passed in a silence that was louder than any argument. No texts from Genevieve, no calls from Alistair. Serafina had scrubbed all photos of the engagement dinner from her social media. The stillness was their answer. I sat at the rough-hewn table in my apartment, watching the view count on a local news clip climb. Someone had filmed Cassandra's entrance and my departure, titling it, "Architectural Titan and Vespera's Mystery Owner Put on a Masterclass in Power." That afternoon, Julian sent a one-line text. "I never meant to offend you. It was a misunderstanding. I deleted it without responding. Humiliation is not a misunderstanding. It's a choice." Later, a friend forwarded me a link to a society blog. A post claimed Serafina and Julian's engagement was on hold, citing rumors of a conflict of interest after Julian's firm was publicly shamed for having tried and failed to acquire a property that was part of my company's waterfront restoration project. Genevieve called around 4. I let it ring twice, then answered. "Lyra," she began, her voice brittle. "You embarrassed this family. But you did well." "You don't have to be proud of me, Mother," I said, my voice steady. "You just have to stop pretending I don't exist." There was a breath, a pause, and then the click of the line, going dead. I didn't expect a full surrender, and I didn't get one. But it wasn't a dismissal either. It was a crack in the foundation. The following week, my brother, Ronan, showed up at my office unannounced. He looked lost among the blueprints and soil samples, holding a peace offering of coffee. "I didn't get it," he started, not looking at me. "I thought you were just being difficult, rejecting Dad's help, doing things the hard way." He finally met my eyes. "But I watched you the other night. You weren't fighting them. You were just, you, solid. Like you'd been that person all along, and we were the ones who couldn't see it." He pushed one of the coffees across the table. "I was scared to choose wrong," he admitted. "You weren't. That deserves respect." We didn't hug. We didn't fix the years of distance. But he acknowledged the truth. And sometimes, acknowledgement is the first step toward mending what is broken. The real victory wasn't in their silence or their reluctant respect. It was in the greenhouse above my workshop the next Saturday morning. The air was warm and smelled of damp earth and possibility. I was hosting my monthly mentorship brunch for young women from underserved communities, women who wanted to build things. They held notebooks, not phones, their faces hungry for knowledge, not for validation. One of them, a shy 19-year-old named Sophia, raised her hand. "Did you always know you'd end up here?" I smiled. "Not at all. But I always knew where I didn't want to stay." I told them about the failures, the real ones, the silent, gutting ones that don't make for a good TED Talk. I told them that building a life is like restoring a derelict building. You have to tear down the parts that are rotten before you can lay a new foundation. As our session ended, my assistant quietly handed me an iPad. A press release had just gone live. The UN Global Compact was launching a new sustainability initiative. Its official slogan, displayed on a banner behind the Secretary General, were the 5 words from my old tote bag, the one my mother had used for her gardening tools. "We mend what is broken." A picture of me, taken months ago at a community garden, sleeves rolled up and dirt on my cheek, was featured prominently. My eyes watered, but I blinked the tears away and smiled. I didn't need to be at their table anymore. I had built my own. And at this table, there was a seat for everyone willing to do the work. The greatest act of rebellion isn't to tear down the old world, but to quietly, persistently, and unapologetically build a new one in its shadow until, one day, your creation is the only thing casting a light.